Ladies and gentlemen, as the president of the Heritage Foundation, it's a very great privilege for me to welcome our good friends from Patrick Henry College to this very special event. Marvin Olasky is no stranger to the Heritage Foundation. He was a Bradley Fellow with us in 1989 to 1990 when he started work on his very, very important book, The Tragedy of American Compassion. He'll be interviewing Senator John Thune, who likewise is no stranger to heritage, since John has shared with us his thoughts on many public policy issues over the years. So it's a very great pleasure to welcome them both back and to ask Graham Walker, the president of Patrick Henry College, if he would please, to come up and do his introductions.
Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to co-sponsor this event between Patrick Henry College and the Heritage Foundation. As you may know, Patrick Henry College is just a short drive outside the nation's capital. We're a national liberal arts college committed to the cause of Christ and the cause of liberty. It is also a special privilege to be able to note this morning that Dr. Marvin Olasky is now a member of our faculty at Patrick Henry College. He is the inaugural holder of the college's distinguished chair in journalism and public policy. And he certainly advances the efforts that we have underway to educate deeply and thoroughly and Christianly future leaders for America. And Senator Thune, let me offer my thanks for your participating with us. And now let's hear what these guys have to say.
Senator, thank you for coming here.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
You are, to my knowledge, the only senator to have graduated from an explicitly, very solidly Christian college, Biola University in Los Angeles. You're known as a Christian. Are there any times when your Christian convictions come into conflict with your role as a Republican leader?
Well, I don't think that I would characterize it as coming into conflict. I think your faith is always tested at different times, and you know, there are times when if you're going to stand up for your principles and things that you believe in, those things are going to be, and particularly in this environment, are going to get shot at a lot and going to get attacked. But I think that's kind of inevitable. I mean, this is people come here, they have very different worldviews, different ideas about how to solve problems, and so it strikes me at least that we shouldn't be surprised when that happens. But having grown up in a Christian home, attended, as you said, a Christian liberal arts college, you know, the expectation, I think, is, and I would say to the students who are here from Patrick Henry College too, that that's something you need to be prepared to do, to defend your faith, to defend the views that you have, the convictions that you have, and to be able to advocate strongly for those principles in public life.
I know one pastor often asks members of the congregation, is there something that you would otherwise do that you're not doing because you're a Christian, or is there something that you would not be doing that you are doing as a Christian? So let me be specific. Can you point to, let's say, a particular piece of legislation or some situation where you backed it, and had you not been a Christian, you would not have supported it?
Well, I think that any time you're dealing with the issues of that are built around our foundation and values and those sorts of things, that if you're not a Christian, you know, you perhaps have a very different view of some of those issues. You know, my views on the sanctity of life, on the traditional marriage, and those sorts of things are shaped very much by my Christian beliefs, and I think that's sort of a natural thing. I think, as I said before, a lot of people come to public life and they have different backgrounds, different experiences, and that sort of shapes the way they view the issues, shapes their philosophy in many respects. And so I suspect that if that weren't the case, that I might have a different view on some of those issues. But I think it's really important that whatever your vocation is in life, and I think many people choose to do other things, and I think we need good Christian people involved in the world of business, in the world of finance, in the legal world, in the healthcare world, in the world of high tech, all those types of things. That you know, those professions in many respects give you a platform to do your work, but also to serve a purpose, and that's to glorify God.
So let me push a little more for specifics. I mean, you mentioned life issues,
right?
But was there some time during your time in the Senate here a piece of legislation that you really had great political benefit, let's say, in supporting were you to support it, be decided not to because of your Christian convictions?
That I would have benefited from politically, to have supported it, but you know, off the top of my head, I can't think of anything that immediately comes to mind. You know, I think that, as I said, you're always presented with any particular vote, any particular issue. You get a lot of information. You try and do your best to make an informed decision, process it, and I think you make a decision informed by your constituents, the people that you represent, but also informed by your conscience. But I don't know. I mean, if I think of something as we're having this discussion, I'll relate that. But there isn't anything that immediately comes to mind where that's the case. I think that it's fairly easy for me in most cases because I have pretty strong convictions, a pretty well-honed philosophy to feel good about most of the votes that I make. I mean, there are probably some occasions and some exceptions to that, but by and large, that's the case.
Let me mention to our constituents here in the audience that you have a writing implement of some sort, and you have these slips of paper. Any questions that come to you, write them down, and at 12:30 or so, I'll ask you to pass them to the aisles where they'll be collected, and there'll be time for some of those questions for me to address to Senator Thune here. Let's talk about constituents for a moment. Murdo, South Dakota, is your hometown, one of the windiest towns.
That's correct.
In the nation. and by the way, I know about South Dakota winds. The day after I graduated from college, I started bicycling from Boston to Oregon, and was all the way going 70 miles a day, very steadily, until I hit the winds of South Dakota. And then I was down to 30 miles a day, and after 5 days of that, someone offered me a ride. Well, I'll take you to Wyoming, and much to my embarrassment, I succumbed and took it. So I did not bicycle all the way across the country. I did, except for the western
Well, you
part
have to
of
come
South
back
Dakota.
and finish that up.
Well, let me ask then about wind power,
Right.
because that's one of the things that you've been advocating, and I know personally, you know, of the winds of South Dakota.
Right.
It doesn't seem to be financially viable, at least right now. It requires a lot of federal assistance to do that. Is that something you're for? Does that in any way clash with your fiscal conservatism?
Well, I think that you know, it's a resource that we have an abundance of. South Dakota. You know, some states have oil and gas, some states have coal. We have wind. And I always tell the story in South Dakota for most of my adult life, and I think for the most part, most people who've grown up and lived in South Dakota are always cursing the wind for some reason, one reason or another. One of my older brothers, I remember, was playing the homecoming football game in my hometown, and the wind was blowing so hard that particular night that he dropped back into punt formation. When he punted the ball, the wind took it through the goalpost behind him. And I'm not even sure what that is in football, but it's, you know, if it's a resource that we can utilize to produce energy, then we think that's a good thing. Now, it needs to be done in a fiscally responsible way, and I think we're going to have a big debate in the very near future about how do we provide for America's energy needs, and can we afford to have these incentives that we have in place today for a lot of these various forms of energy. There's a production tax credit that exists today for wind production, and that's been extended several times. So there are people obviously who would like to do away with that, like to do away with the same credit that's available to solar energy and other types of renewable energy. But I think we ought to be doing what we can to move toward energy sources that we have an abundance of, that are renewable, that are American, and in this case very environmentally friendly. But within the confines of what we can afford to do. And I think right now that's going to be a very, very big factor. It is increasingly in the environment we're in, all these, many of these provisions, not only spending, but provisions that provide incentives in our tax code are going to be reviewed and scrutinized at a much higher level as a result of our financial condition as a country.
Well, and that leads me to ethanol. I believe 1 billion gallons a year produced in South Dakota.
Right.
And highly subsidized in many ways. And also, I gather, and you have a lot more expertise than this on me, but I gather it does tend to raise food prices, raises the price of corn tortillas in Mexico City, for example. Any problems with that? Obviously, it's something that benefits farmers of South Dakota, but does it benefit other people, and is it a good expense to keep pushing forward on that?
Well, I think that industry and the public policy that surrounds it is in transition. And there was a vote earlier this year in the summer on the blend, what we call the blender's credit for ethanol, which was defeated in the Senate. It didn't make its way to the House, but that prompted a discussion about reforming that. And so I worked with some of my colleagues on both sides to come up with a proposal that would take the savings that would accrue to the end of the year from doing away completely with that blender's credit, applying some of it to debt relief and some of it to some other types of incentives that would continue to advance the industry but do it in a way that doesn't rely on the blender's credit. My own view is that we have, again, I mean, we grow corn in South Dakota, we grow corn in this country. It is something that benefits the Midwest, it benefits our economy, it reduces our dependence upon foreign sources of energy. And as much as people criticize ethanol, and I understand that, and I understand there are lots of there's a coalition of groups that have come out in opposition to it, but we did produce 13 billion gallons last year, which displaced 445 million barrels of oil. And so, much of that oil we're importing from the Middle East, and I think that if we can be getting an energy resource from the Midwest rather than the Middle East, that's a good thing. Again, it has to be coupled with and looked at in the light of how can we do this in a way that balances the very serious fiscal challenges that we face as a nation right now. But I think that the policies of the future are going to have to reflect that, and that's why I say I think it's in transition. I do think that the food versus fuel argument I understand there are folks who believe that it's inflating food costs. If you actually sit down and break that out, there is way more cost associated with increase in food in this country with the increase in oil. Transportation, packaging, there are so many things that in the terms of all the things that we buy that are very energy dependent. And you look at the amount of corn that's in a box of cornflakes or even popcorn for that matter, and you look at the cost of those products today relative to how oil impacts, and the increase in oil has impacted the cost of many of those products that you buy in the grocery store, you can come to a very different conclusion. But there is this sort of discussion surrounding biofuels today, and shaped by this debate about food versus fuel. I think the key in all this is to move to the next generation of biofuels, and that means making it out of switchgrass, making it out of corn stover, making it out of things that are not that don't rely on a kernel of corn to do it.
So it strikes me that liberal senators have it easier than conservative senators in one sense. A liberal senator who both wants to spend more money and also wants to do things that benefit his constituents can be very consistent in that. Are there times when, as a conservative senator and a fiscally responsible senator, the particular interest in getting more for the voters of South Dakota conflicts with your fiscal conservatism? I
think part of it, the culture of states are different, and my state has over the years had political representation that has looked at their sort of role here as federal representatives in terms of going to Washington and getting more funding for this particular program or this project or that project. And so you kind of have to, you go through a process where you have to sort of reshape that. And I think right now our economic and fiscal circumstances are doing that for us. I mean, I think that people in my state, like every other state around the country, are now recognizing that even though there may be programs in the past on which they have depended or benefited from, that if we're serious about future generations and making sure that we hand them a future that ensures that they will have the opportunity for a standard of living like we've enjoyed, that we've got to change our ways. And so I think that it's much easier if you're a liberal, because if you're a liberal, you just believe you just grow government, and the government's the solution, and you don't have there's no real concern about, in most cases at least, the size of government, because that's something that they, I think, fundamentally believe in. If you're a conservative who believes in a limited role for the government, then yes, you have a very difficult, more difficult decision when it comes to some of these issues that might impact your state. But I think, again, today in America, my state, like every other state, recognizes we have got to learn to live within our means. We can't spend money we don't have, And that might mean that there's going to be less money for this project or that project that perhaps benefit a constituency in South Dakota or other states around the country. But we just can't continue to do what we're doing.
And we've had a lot of news recently about the problems of government picking winners or losers. We have the Solyndra thing most dramatically, but crony capitalism, or I think Jim DeMint calls it venture socialism. Is there a time when government should pointedly, for purposes of energy or other purposes, really work to support a particular company, give loans to a particular company, and so forth, or would you be against that across the board?
Well, I think that again, there perhaps are, as you're making public policy, over the time we've created so many different agencies, so many different programs. And Ronald Reagan once said the closest thing to immortality on this planet is a government program. Once you create it, you can't get rid of it. And that's why I think you have to be really resistive to and reluctant to create new government programs, because they grow over time. They tend to have a tendency to metastasize. And so government gets bigger and bigger, more intrusive, more invasive, and we have this now pattern and practice of kind of serial intervention. Whenever anything goes wrong, we think the government needs to come in and do something about it and fix it. And we've kind of gotten away from the free market, free enterprise principles in this country. And I think that the idea of government picking winners and losers is a bad one. And I think that, again, if there are a set of incentives that you want to put out there because you want a particular outcome, do it in a way that is technology neutral, do it in a way that allows whoever has the best idea, the best technology, to go out there and do it. And I think that selectively saying this particular industry or this particular type of project is something that we're going to make a loan here or a grant here, and doing that selectively is not, in the long run, good policy, particularly when you're running $1.5 trillion deficits, but more importantly, I think gets us away from the allowing the market to decide those things. So I think the key for me, at least, and again, we've got exceptions to this because of things that have been, when I came here, there were many policies that were in place and that were beneficial to my state, but I think by and large, you want to look at putting policies in place that create economic certainty, that provide incentives for investors, for entrepreneurs, for small businesses to do what they do best, and that is invest and create jobs. And so by that, you want to have low taxes, you want to have low regulations, you want to have, hopefully favorable conditions for borrowing. But those are all things that, within reason, of course, but those are all things I think that create the kind of conditions for economic growth that we want to see. My state is a right-to-work state. We don't have a personal or corporate income tax. We don't have a personal property tax. We've got a great workforce. Those are the types of policies that I think are conducive to economic growth, and one of the reasons why our unemployment rate is less than 5%, where the national average around the country is significantly higher than that, 9.1% nationally. But we're a small state. I know there are other things that factor in and weigh into that, but I do think that states that have put those types of policies in place benefit because they are attractive then to the job creators, the entrepreneurs, the investors who want to invest and grow jobs.
We're hearing a lot the past week or so since a census report showed an increase in poverty in the United States. We're hearing a lot about that. Certainly, even before our recent economic difficulties, the number of people on food stamps was jumping. It's gone up from 17 million to 46 million over the past decade. What do you think the government should do in terms of fighting poverty? What should the government do? What should churches do? What should private organizations do? How do these responsibilities work out?
Well, I think first off, the best solution to all of those problems that you mentioned are good jobs, and I think getting people back to work. I talked about creating the right conditions for job creation and economic growth. I think right now we've got government that's growing too fast. It's gotten too big. Is crowding out private investment, and we're seeing the private economy shrink relative to our GDP. Our government economy now is almost 25% of our GDP. The historical average for the past 40 years is 20.6%. And if you look at the last 5 times that the budget has been balanced in this country, you go back to 1969, we've only balanced the budget, if you can imagine that, 5 times. in every circumstance, it was less than the historical average. In fact, the average is 18.7% spending as a percentage of GDP in those times when we balanced our budget. So I think the thing that we've got going today, in my view, is government has become, or views itself at least, as the solver of all these problems, the solution to all these problems, when in fact you do need the private organizations, you do need the faith-based organizations, the charitable groups out there contributing to this. And you know, I think there is a place for government to help people who cannot help themselves. I believe in that role for our government. But I also believe that you have to have a vibrant economy that is creating jobs that allow people to work and to get derive their well-being and their ability to feed their family from the marketplace as opposed to from the government. And so trying to reduce the size, get government back to its more historical norm, expand the private economy, get it growing and creating jobs, I think solves a lot of those problems. But to your point, I mean, food stamps, poverty have all increased in the last few years. In my state of South Dakota, food stamps now, I think we've seen like a 58% increase since 2008 in the number of people on food stamps, which is not a trend we want to see continued, and certainly not a data point that we ought to be proud of. But you know, I think it's a function of getting those other organizations more engaged, having the government get back to a more historical norm in terms of its you know, what it views as the things that it can do, and to unleash the private economy to get jobs created out there.
Let me ask a question about immigration. There's of course been the battle for many years, and Democrats seem to resist measures to improve border security. Republicans have been resisting the DREAM Act and other legislation of that kind. If there were an agreement to dramatically improve border security, if that were done, would you be in favor of the DREAM Act?
Well, you know, I think should be some recognition for people who serve their country. I mean, if you have people who are serving in the military and contributing mightily to the defense of this country, the betterment of this country, there should be recognition of that. But there's also got to be, I mean, we have laws for a reason. And we are a country that is a nation of immigrants, and I say that as being someone who's one generation removed. My grandfather came here from Norway back in 1906, along with my great uncle, in pursuit of the American dream. And I think that there are hundreds and thousands and millions of Americans who have similar stories. But they did it by the law. And if we're going to be a nation of laws, and we are a nation of laws, then we've got to enforce our laws. And if we don't enforce our laws, then I think that then you end up eventually with chaos. You can't have laws on your books and allow people to just violate them and there be no consequence. So my own view on that is I'm not somebody who supported the DREAM Act. I voted against it in the past. I do believe that the fundamental issue here is to start with is border security. You will hear a lot of us say that. I think it is true. We've got to be able to enforce our borders, and I've, you know, someone has described it as a tall fence with a big gate. If we want to get people here in this country, then let's come up with a legal way to get people here, more people into this country, but do it legally as opposed to having them come here illegally. We can't condone that as a nation of laws, and so I'd probably take more of a hard line on that because I think it's important principle. It's a part of the rule of law is just a part of our heritage, the foundation for this country. And I understand that we've got there are always going to be exceptions, and people have circumstances that create a great amount of sympathy. And but you know, at some point you've got to have rules, you've got to have law, you've got to have principles, and you need to honor them.
What do you say to, let's say, teenagers who did not break the law, at least intentionally? They were brought here, let's say, by their parents when they were 2 years old, and every time they hear a siren, they're worried about being arrested and deported and so forth. Well,
and those are really difficult situations, and that's why I mentioned earlier. You know, there is. If you're someone who has a heart, you obviously are incredibly sympathetic to people who are in that particular circumstance. And perhaps there is a way in which we can deal with that population. But again, that can't happen until we deal with the issue at the border of illegal immigration. And I don't think anybody believes that we have satisfied that imperative yet. So, you know, those types of issues and those types of circumstances are, they break your heart, and you hate to see kids who are in that situation. And I think as a Christian, you know, obviously you want to do your part to care for people who are in need, but you also understand that as a nation of laws, we have to respect our laws. So those are difficult circumstances, which I think, you know, we can come up with solutions for, but not until we deal with that first fundamental issue, and that's enforcing our borders.
And by the way, if you have questions, pass your cards to the folks in the audience. We'll be going to those in just a couple minutes. A couple more questions. One thing I'm often asked, and I hope you can answer this, is why, when Republicans did have a majority in Congress, for example, the first couple of years that you were there in the Senate, why didn't Republicans do anything on health care? It seems to a lot of people, well, you're complaining now, but when you had a chance to do something, you didn't do anything. So why did that happen?
Well, I think that we tried. And when I was a member of the House of Representatives, we tried repeatedly to pass legislation that would allow for groups to form, or individuals to form larger groups to be able to buy in what we call, they call them association health plans, now they call them small business health plans, but essentially to allow the value of group purchasing power to form those types of things. To purchase insurance across state lines. We tried repeatedly to get votes on medical malpractice reform. And in fact, in some cases, when I first got to the Senate, that was one of the first big votes we cast. I think we got 58 votes for medical malpractice reform. We needed 60. And at that time, the Democrats were in the minority, so they filibustered it. We couldn't get to the 60-vote threshold to invoke cloture, and as a consequence, we lost our opportunity to get that passed. And I think that when I was in the House, we repeatedly sent legislation to the Senate on some of these issues that I mentioned. And in each case, it was defeated either by filibuster or by vote. But it's not like we haven't tried. And I think that most of us, there isn't anybody who doesn't acknowledge that we have a problem. I mean, we've got a lot of people who are not covered today. We have health insurance costs that are going up dramatically because there's so much cost shifting going on. When Medicare and Medicaid don't cover provider costs, they shift it over to the private payer market, and so everybody else pays much higher insurance premiums. And so the cost shifting issue continues to worsen over time. So there are all kinds of problems with health care in America today, made much worse, in my view, by the passage of Obamacare. I think that made it more complicated. I think it's going to make a bad problem even worse, because you're now pushing another 16 or 17 million people into Medicaid, which under-reimburses providers, and which many providers are leaving. And you're passing a big burden onto the states. The states are going to have to figure out how they're going to pay for the additional costs associated with the new people that are coming into the program. And you didn't do anything to really address the fundamental drivers of health care costs, and that's to deal with utilization. And so it was a big government response. It was a response by people who have a very different view of the role of government in America. And so I think that to answer your question, Republicans have tried to do things unsuccessfully, but the solution that was come up with by the Democrats is going to be disastrous in my view.
Let's see, I'll take those questions now, and while they're coming up here, here's the hardest question. You were a very good high school and college basketball player. If you went one-on-one with President Obama, who would win?
Well, I wouldn't want to handicap that one, but I think he's a pretty good player, at least from what I see. But I'm still waiting for my invitation to come down to the White House and play him. I haven't gotten that yet.
Okay. Question, do you believe we should allow for shale drilling, and should this be a priority for energy independence?
Sure. I mean, I think that, we have so many resources in this country that we don't access today. And instead, we send $1 billion a day outside the United States to buy foreign oil. To get 60 to 70% of your fuel from outside the U.S. when you have these resources here at home, absolutely makes no sense to me. And I think there are, with the technologies that we have today, ways that can be done that are environmentally sound, environmentally friendly. But why wouldn't we develop American resources and create American jobs as opposed to continue to buy our fuel needs from countries around the world that in many cases are hostile to our interest. So there's no question in my mind but that we ought to be moving forward with all forms of energy, domestic energy production.
Yesterday, the Fed moved $400 billion to 30-year maturity bonds, signaling that it feels the current slow growth economy will last for many years to come. This outlook is fueling fears of a return of stagflation. What do you believe the government's role should be in mitigating sticky wages?
Well, I think that the Fed has used all of the levers available to it to try and, again, intervene in this situation. But, you know, at the end of the day, and I think that the Fed can influence monetary policy. Obviously, the Congress and what we work with is fiscal policy. But on our side of it, we have got to cut spending and grow the economy. I mean, to me, it's a very simple thing. You reduce federal spending and you've got to grow the private economy for all the reasons I mentioned earlier. I think the good-paying, permanent jobs come out of the private economy. They don't come from growing government. Government is not a good allocator of capital. And we want the marketplace to do that. And so, you know, I'm very apprehensive and reluctant about the Federal Reserve becoming more aggressive than they already have been. We had QE1, QE2. They're always looking for ways to get you know, banks lending, to get liquidity into the economy. And but I think at some point, and one of the reasons I think that we didn't really bottom out the housing market. I mean, it didn't reach its natural floor because of all the intervention. And Congress, admittedly, we did some of that. The Fed has done some of that. At some point, if you're going to allow the market to work, you've got to allow you know, a lot of these bad loans and things to get worked through the system and allow the housing market to find its natural floor. And I think that we haven't done that, and we're continually and consistently looking for new ways to try and turn this thing around. But in the end, I don't know that more government spending certainly isn't going to do it. Stimulus 1 didn't work. I don't think Stimulus 2 will work. And I'm very skeptical, I guess I would say, of the steps that are being taken now by the Fed.
Well, very skeptical. Was the Fed's decision yesterday a mistake?
You know, I'm not sure I'm in a position to say that one way or the other. I mean, they obviously have access to information that I probably don't. They study these things on a daily basis. But as someone who has sort of followed their activity for a while and been in public life for a while, I'm a little concerned because when you got interest rates down to basically zero, and you have so there isn't much more they can do in terms of lowering interest rates. I am concerned about some other economic bad things that could happen in the economy if these things that they're trying don't work. And so I think probably, I guess I would have left well enough alone, but then again, I'm not in their shoes. So.
Okay. Do you believe it is feasible that a GOP candidate could win the presidential election in 2012? And I suspect we know your answer to that would be yes. Right. But here, if so, who or whom would you endorse?
Well, I haven't endorsed anybody yet. I do think that our candidate can win, and I frankly think our candidate will win. But you would expect me to say that. I don't have, what I want to see is I want to see a candidate who can articulate clearly conservative principles when it comes to the economy, when it comes to America's place in the world, on foreign policy, and a candidate that is electable in a general election. And I think that we have to think about, you know, and as we go through our nominating process, getting a candidate through that when they get to the general election can win. Because in my view, there aren't any candidates, and nobody that runs for public office is going to be perfect. You know, everybody's always looking for the perfect candidate. The perfect candidate doesn't exist. But I know this, whatever candidate we nominate, philosophically, in terms of their beliefs, their values, their policies, is going to be a big improvement in my view, over President Obama. And I'm very concerned about a second Obama term and what that might mean. There could be openings on the Supreme Court, who knows? We've already seen the aggressive way in which they have tried to implement and grow power through the executive branch, executive decisions and rulings, as well as agency regulations. I mean, this is a runaway train, and I'm very concerned about what happens in a second term. So,
it's not asking for an endorsement, but as you look at the field so far, has someone or someone's impressed you? Has someone depressed you?
No, I mean, I think we've got, it's a very spirited debate, and they're mixing it up. I mean, I think our candidates, and there are two who have sort of risen to the top, at least right now, and both Governor Romney and Governor Perry are having a very spirited debate, and I think that's a healthy thing. I mean, I think you want to have a candidate that's tested when they get to the general election. So there's nothing wrong with having these discussions about the issues that they're having. Some of the other candidates, I know almost everybody that's running. They're good people. They have life experiences that would serve them well in the position, and they're adding to the debate. Do I have a favorite at this point? Probably not yet, but I like what I see. I think we've got some candidates emerging that could do very well in a general election.
We only have a few minutes left, so let me just return to Biola for a minute. Why did you go to Biola from South Dakota?
Well, it was, I had a couple of older siblings that had gone out there. And
Couldn't have been the weather.
No, yeah, well, that didn't hurt. But yeah, a kid from the Midwest and the prairie and from a small town going out to the West Coast was, I was a little bit of a fish out of water for a while, a little bit of a hayseed probably out there. But I think my parents were very interested in having seen the way my older siblings turned out. I think they wanted me to have the same sort of experiences. But it's a good Christian liberal arts college. I got a good background, majored in business, went on and got an MBA back at the University of South Dakota. But it was good because it got me away from my support system. It taught me to sort of develop my own views and think for myself, and in many respects make my faith my own. You always kind of have your parents' faith when you're around them, and so in the background I was able to get, the courses I was able to take, it was a very good experience.
For a Christian high school student right now, would you recommend going to a Christian college?
Sure. I think that everybody has different circumstances that they're dealing with. In some cases, Christian education, private universities are expensive, and I understand in this economy how hard that is. I've got a daughter at Bethel University in St. Paul who's a senior this year. But I think that you want to be able to, when you get into whatever your vocation is in life, wherever you go in life, as you serve God's purpose for your generation, you want to be able to make a defense for the hope that's within you. You want to be able to defend your faith, and I think that Christian education helps you do that. I do believe it's important too that Christian young people get exposed outside of that environment too, so they're prepared for the inevitable conflicts they're going to run into later when people challenge them on their beliefs and their faith. But I think that Christian education is a great place to develop, to learn, to refine, and to hone those beliefs, and to be able to learn how to articulate in a way that makes sense.
How do you, as a senator, and running around all day long and having 30 meetings a day and so forth, and et cetera, all the pressures, how do you keep your Christian faith growing?
I think you have to stay grounded, and it's not easy because the demands. I'd say one of the biggest challenges that you face is just the schedule. Your time in most cases is not your own, and so it is somewhat limiting. But I think it's got to be a priority, and the busier you get, sometimes the more important it becomes. You have a tendency when you're really busy to squeeze out the things that are most important, and starting off the day right, and spending some time in the scriptures and prayer for me is really important. It gets my day started right, and sometimes I have a lot of events in the morning, sometimes early in the morning, that start to crowd that out. But it's really got to be a priority. And I think, too, it's important to have fellowship. I think being involved in a faith community to continue to maintain that. When I'm home in South Dakota, my wife and I, and when our girls are home, and they're both in school now, but I make it a priority to be in church and to continue to maintain a lot of those relationships and to have that opportunity to be around.
What church do you go to?
Central Baptist Church, Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
And what kind of fellowship do you have in Washington?
Well, you know, there's a Bible study, which incidentally I'm missing right now, that the chaplain puts on every week, and it's very good. There are a small group of us that get together there. There are other opportunities where some of us will get together and talk about spiritual things. It's not as formalized as perhaps it could or should be, but it's very difficult to plan around as many schedules as you have to deal with in the United States Senate. But you try to work at it, make it a priority, and it's always going to be a challenge.
12:45, and I do suspect you have some work to do. So please join me in thanking Senator Thune for coming today.
Thanks, Marvin. Thank you all.